Homeworld 3 is good, actually. I was planning to review this game in any case because I am a big fan of the Homeworld franchise. I played Homeworld 1, Homeworld 2, and Homeworld Cataclysm around the time they released, so of course I was eager to see how Homeworld 3 would turn out. But what I was not expecting was for the game to be so brutally savaged in these Steam reviews. It's currently sitting at 43% mix, which is quite bad. So I wanted to provide a little bit of an alternative take because I quite enjoyed the game. Now to start off with, I want to talk a little bit about the controls of Homeworld 3 and the general gameplay flow because I think this is actually one of the bigger improvements in the game. When you start Homeworld 3, you will have the option to use a modern control scheme or the legacy control scheme. Choosing the modern controls will give you a free roaming camera that you can move around with WASD as well as the Q and E keys for vertical movement. This did confuse me for a few minutes because I, of course, tried to play the game like the older titles, but I do think the modern controls provide you with a lot more fine-grained control over the camera, and they feel quicker when shifting between different units. You still have the legacy control scheme, which is more focused on revolving around particular units, and you can use that if you'd want, but I definitely suggest giving the modern control scheme a try, and I also think that new players will find it a lot more intuitive. Moving units around works a lot differently as well because Homeworld 3 has maps that actually include terrain in the form of various megalithic structures or asteroids. It's a very big element of the game, actually. And because there is terrain, that means you can at times click on it to directly move a unit there without having to open the move wheel. And this is generally the way to go if the place you want to move to is terrain because you can get your movement done with fewer clicks. The move wheel is still there, however, and it is critical when you want to move your ships through open space. Another subtle but major difference between Homeworld 3 and earlier games, which is that the Sensors Manager is a lot less important. Now, if you have never played a Homeworld game before, you can basically think of the Sensors Manager as Homeworld's take on a minimap. It's a view that appears when you zoom all the way out, and it includes easy-to-see icons that help you identify ships quickly. However, in Homeworld 3, you can maneuver the camera in such a way that you can see the entire battlefield, or at least most of it, with the standard camera and without using the Sensors Manager. So I open the Sensors Manager a lot less often. This makes the game feel a little bit more like Supreme Commander or Sins of a Solar Empire. You can zoom straight up as close as possible to a ship, but then flick the scroll wheel to zoom out and view the entire battlefield at once. Now these changes take some getting used to. I actually replayed the tutorial because my muscle memory kept wanting to go back to the older style of playing the game. However, I think the way the game plays now is ultimately a lot more modern, flexible, intuitive, and it feels like a better fit for a modern game and for the capabilities of modern computers. I think Homeworld's 3 overall controllability and playability is a really big upgrade. I suspect it might even be a little hard to go back to the Homeworld style controls in Homeworld Remastered. So if any really ambitious mod makers out there want to make a total conversion mod that brings Homeworld 1 into the Homeworld 3 engine, that would be awesome. So now that I've explained a little bit about how the game plays and how that contrasts to the original Homeworld, let's talk about the campaign. First up, the story, which seems to be a central complaint for a lot of negative reviews. And by the way, I'm going to avoid any major spoilers, so I'm not going to tell you anything here you would not learn in the first mission. The game kicks off by introducing you to Imogen Sajet, who is the protege and I think niece of Karen Sajet, the protagonist of the first and second games. It turns out there's been a bit of a problem with the hyperspace network that was set up at the end of Homeworld 2, and about 20 years ago, Karen Sajet went to investigate this anomaly, as it is called in the game, and she never returned. The anomaly has been getting worse, and now it's up to Imogen Sajet to take control of her own mothership, which actually uses hyperspace cores of her own design, that's an important point, remember that, and leap into the anomaly to figure out what the heck is going on, and defeat the unknown enemy that the Hagarans assume is causing the anomaly. In this, Imogen is assisted by Isaac, who takes the role of Intel, and acts as a helpful advisor through the campaign. Now, I like both of these characters. Imogen is a pretty classic fish-out-of-water style protagonist. She's clearly very intelligent and arguably sort of, in quotes, special. I mean, she designed her own hyperspace cores, and she is the protege to the protagonist of the first two games. However, she is quite young and clearly inexperienced at the beginning of the events of this campaign, and that's going to come into play throughout the story. Isaac, on the other hand, He is a veteran, he knows what he's doing, but he doesn't have the capability to control hyperspace like Imogen does through her synthetic hyperspace cores. And I got the sense there was some bitterness, or at least some skepticism between these two characters at the beginning of the campaign, and that does end up playing into the story. This is a much more personal campaign than the earlier Homeworld games, with maybe the exception of Cataclysm, I guess, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. There is also, of course, a villain, and I won't talk too much about the villain because that, of course, would be spoilers. And this is one of the weaker elements of the story. The villain is fairly one-dimensional, which is not at all uncommon in the Homeworld franchise. In fact, I don't think we've had a well-fleshed-out villain in this entire franchise's history. But, this is a new game. This would have been a new opportunity to add a villain that has a bit more depth and complexity to them, and that does not happen. However, with that said, I did like the way the villain was presented and voice acted, and the art design surrounding the villain in the cutscenes is excellent. Speaking of the cutscenes, they are quite good. There is a modern 3D approach taken here, none of the animatics that were in the earlier games, but they are really well-directed cutscenes, and I can absolutely tell that the people making them put a lot of thought into things like the camera angles, the use of lighting, and the perspective and size of different characters and scenes. It's really good stuff, and helped a ton by the fact that all of the voice acting talent in this game is absolutely on their A game. I think I like Isaac the best, but Imogen's not too shabby, and the villain is quite good as well. So the story is great then, right? Well, there is one problem that I think probably is causing a lot of negative reviews and perception around the story, and that is just that it isn't the most well-explained story. The game does have a cinematic that sort of encapsulates the story of Homeworld 1 and Homeworld 2, but you only get that if you click a button below the Start Campaign button. It does not play automatically. And I think that was definitely a big mistake because it is good to have that reminder. And also there's a few little details there at the end that I don't think are properly revealed in the campaign cinematics. So it's really easy to miss what is going on. There is also a written story on Blackbird Interactive's website that's pretty helpful to understanding Imogen and what's going on just before the story starts to happen. And I don't think Blackbird Interactive did itself any favors by not including those details within the introductory cinematic. If I can give you one bit of advice for understanding and appreciating the story a bit better, it's this. And this actually applies to the entire Homeworld franchise. It's all about hyperspace, baby. Hyperspace is the dominant technology in this universe. It is the super weapon in this universe. It is the thing that everyone is fighting over. And if you do not understand that, and unfortunately I think the campaign cinematics don't quite clarify that as well as they should, then the story might just seem like nonsense. Now, with that said, what about the actual campaign structure? How does it play? Well, I really enjoyed the campaign structure, and I think this is why I like the campaign so much, because there's a good mix of missions here, first of all. Second of all, none of the missions are too long. There is one mission that is way too short, and I think maybe the level designer was sick that day, but other than that, there is a good variety of objectives. There are some missions where you'll need to be more offensive, some where you'll need to be more defensive, some where you'll need to be stealthy, and some where, well, I won't say, but I think it is a good mix. Now, what about difficulty? Well, I've played a lot of Homeworld, and on medium difficulty, I found the game to be rather easy. I saw the mission failed screen twice, and encountered two other missions where I felt like I was going to lose, but was able to pull it through in the end. By the way, I would not say I'm a particularly skilled player on the whole, but I still found it to be a fairly easy experience, and that was about the speed I was looking for the campaign, if I'm quite honest. I do think I might go back sometime in the next few months and play it on hard to see how that goes, because I'm learning a bit more about how the game works now that I'm playing the war game system, which I will talk about in a second. Also, the campaign itself is short. You should expect to play between, I'd say, 8 to 12 hours, depending on your personal familiarity with these kind of games and the difficulty level that you choose. Whether this is long enough or not is a decision you'll have to make for yourself. Speaking personally, I am not inclined to want to have a campaign that overstays its welcome, and oftentimes around 10 to 20 hours is what I prefer, unless I'm playing a huge role-playing game like something in the Baldur's Gate series. In fact, I'm not really a campaign guy when it comes to real-time strategy games. I mean, one of my favorites for a long time has been Sins of a Solar Empire, and that doesn't even have a campaign. It's just all skirmish all the time. So if you agree with me on that, you will probably like the length of this campaign, and if you do not agree with me on that, you probably are going to feel it's too short. Now, once you finish the campaign, you really have two options for playing the game. One, of course, is the skirmish mode, which lets you play multiplayer or against the AI on a variety of maps, and this is pretty standard stuff. However, I will say that it is really cool to see the new maps that actually have terrain features, and I do think this makes the skirmish mode more interesting. The terrain actually does matter. If you can manage to get an ambush on your opponent, you are going to have a very major advantage in the fight. Now, when it comes to the multiplayer scene, it's honestly way too early to say whether or not Homeworld 3 will have legs. I suspect the multiplayer scene for the game will be fairly small overall, and as far as the balance goes, I really could not tell you at this point. It's really too early in the game's life cycle to determine whether or not the sides are well balanced. Nothing immediately jumped out to me aside from the fact that I cannot for the life of me figure out how to use railgun corvettes without them immediately getting killed the instant anything looks at them. Now, the skirmish mode is kind of interesting because a lot of players have been complaining that it's too hard, and in fact, the skirmish mode AI is extremely aggressive. Now, that is not at all to say it is unbeatable. In fact, I've also seen complaints that it's too easy to beat, but you should expect skirmishes to be very aggressive. You're going to be making a lot of units all the time, you're going to be fighting almost all the time, and if you're not doing that, you're probably falling behind because this game does not reward a passive playstyle. This is actually a trait of the entire Homeworld franchise. It's arguably one of the defining features of the gameplay of Homeworld 1 compared to its contemporaries, but it may still take some getting used to. And that brings us to the War Games mode, which a lot of people have been calling a roguelite mode, and I think that label is appropriate. The War Games mode throws you into a set of randomized missions where you are tasked with completing certain objectives before you can hyperspace to the next mission. And while you are trying to complete those objectives, the game throws an ever-escalating amount of units at you, which means that if you take too long, you are almost certainly going to die. But if you manage to live in hyperspace to the next mission, you get to pick from a few artifacts, as they're called, and each artifact you select will provide some very significant bonuses to certain units, along with some disadvantages, and many of them also unlock skill trees that can add additional skills to your units that are not normally available. Now, these artifacts are not subtle. We're talking a 100% bonus to range or a 25% bonus to damage dealt, and they can greatly affect how you end up building your fleet through the War Games mode. And once you finish the mode, you'll get an amount of experience based on how many missions you manage to progress through, and that experience will unlock additional tiers of fleets, each of which have their own unique composition, as well as more artifacts that add more abilities and bonuses to your ships. And I have to say, this mode has really got its hooks into me right now. It is basically a sort of skirmish mode that you can play anytime you want, either solo or in multiplayer. But unlike the skirmish mode, the War Games mode adds a degree of randomization, which helps to keep it fresh. And the various artifacts that you will randomly unlock encourage you to experiment with different fleet builds. I think this is very clever because I've always found that the reality of real-time strategy games skirmish modes is that it does tend to get stale after a while. Things tend to settle into a meta, right? If you're playing a multiplayer, people tend to find the best strategies and will use them. So you either have to use those strategies yourself or you lose. If you're playing against the AI, you have a little bit more flexibility to use the strategies that you want, but because it's always going to be the same thing against the same opponents, it can get boring pretty quickly. The War Games mode solves for that, and I imagine I'll eventually get tired of it as well, but it is a very good gameplay system, and one that can be easily expanded upon in the future with more maps, more mission objectives, more artifacts, more fleets, and in fact there's already a roadmap for future fleets and additions made available by Blackbird Interactive. Now that I have covered all the gameplay modes and features in Homeworld 3, you might be wondering about a more simple question. Is it fun to play? Is the gameplay enjoyable? And I would say yes, absolutely. There's a few things that I like about Homeworld 3's gameplay. First off is the pace. I'm not saying that I like fast-paced games more than slow-paced games. In fact, I would say that the opposite is true. However, I like a game to kind of pick a lane and stay there, And Homeworld 3 is very obviously in the fast-paced lane. You sit down, you play a game, it's probably going to last 15 to 30 minutes, then you win or lose, and you can decide if you want to play another one or not. The experience of playing a mission is bite-sized, but it's also really easy to get into a new mission, so it's very easy to just find yourself thinking, I should just play one more game. I mean, hey, it's only going to take 20 minutes, and then next thing you know, a couple hours have passed. I also think fundamentally it's a very smooth game and one that has the controls, visuals, and performance necessary to allow you to focus on fleet tactics. And to me, those tactics did feel meaningful. It matters whether or not you use the terrain. It matters whether or not you approach your enemy from the front or from the rear. It matters whether or not you use the regular move action when trying to retreat from battle or the attack move action. And the various special abilities that ships have in this game are extremely impactful, and it makes a huge difference if you use them at the right time. Now, I may just be in the honeymoon phase at the moment, but right now, from where I'm sitting, I'm not entirely sure why I would want to go back and play Homeworld Remastered now that Homeworld 3 is out. Homeworld 3 is just smoother, it's better looking, the ships control more easily, they have more special abilities that feel more impactful. It just seems like an all-around better experience than Homeworld Remastered, which I still enjoy playing, but in some respects was showing its age even when it released 9 years ago now, if you can believe that. Also, this should kind of go without saying for a Homeworld game, but the visuals and the audio design are absolutely superb, top-notch, AAA. This is a beautiful game that is a treat to listen to. The music is excellent. I really have no notes for the visual and audio presentation of this game. There were multiple moments where I found myself just sort of staring at the scene and just thinking, wow, this looks really nice. Also, it does actually perform pretty well. I played it with a Radeon 7800 XT at 4K resolution and high detail and was getting over 60 frames per second in most situations. So I was pretty impressed with that, especially considering how beautiful the game is. So I think Blackbird Interactive deserves props for very excellent technical execution. Also, as far as bugs go, didn't see any. The game was rock solid. That is always something that is very individual. Just because I don't have bugs doesn't mean you won't have bugs, but I did not experience any issues whatsoever while I was playing Homeworld 3. So that is a wrap. I really enjoyed Homeworld 3. I think it is a good game. I would say a very good game. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I think I will continue enjoying it for at least a few more weeks, which is saying a lot because I tend to get distracted rather easily. Also, this game immediately went to the top of my list for Game of the Year 2024. I am an MMO enjoyer, so it's possible that the expansions for Final Fantasy XIV or World of Warcraft will end up knocking it out of that spot, but otherwise I don't see a lot of good contenders for the rest of the year. And remember, this is computer gaming yesterday. If it's not a game that was made with the PC as the primary platform, I'm not really interested. So, that cuts out a lot of console-centric games that I know a lot of people like, but that's not my jam. I like to stick with the PC as much as possible. And Homeworld 3 is a great PC game. So, with that said, would I recommend it to you? I would say, yeah, generally, as long as the $60 price tag doesn't put you off too much. This is not a game that you're going to buy and probably play for 100 or 200 hours. At least, I don't think so. And if that's a requirement for you to buy a full-price game, then just don't buy it then and wait for a sale. But with that said, if you want an enjoyable campaign, if you want to follow that campaign with a nice randomized mode that's going to keep you on your toes and encourage you to learn the finer nuances of the gameplay, then Homeworld 3 is going to be a great real-time strategy game for you. Now, if you want to learn a little bit more about the Homeworld franchise, check out the recommended video. At the end of this one, I spoke to Gary Shaw, a programmer on the original game, to find out more about how it was made, and there's some never-before-heard details in that video, so I think you'll really enjoy it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.